We are. Hi everyone, and welcome to another Azure Greg stream. Tonight we have the wonderful Tim Warner. Tim, how are you, sir?
Hey there, Azure Greg. I'm doing great. How are you doing?
It's funny when you call me Azure Greg. Yeah, I have to laugh. Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. How are you? All good?
Yeah, all good. Definitely.
Awesome. So tonight you wanted to chat to me about OpenAI, Azure OpenAI. So before we get into it, I always jump straight into questions. But for people who don't know who you are, who've been living under a rock, tell us a little bit about Tim Warner and who you are.
Yeah, by all means. My Twitter handle, I'm still on Twitter for the time
yeah.
being, is
I've
Tech
got all
Trainer Tim. And that really sums up my bag. I've been a Microsoft specialist for about 25 years, but my particular niche is teaching. That blending of education and IT is what I'm all about. And over the last several years, I've gotten deeper and deeper into the Azure platform and the Microsoft Cloud platform. And then even more recently now into the OpenAI, which is what we're talking about today.
Brilliant. And how did the OpenAI thing come about? Did you fall into that, or was it just, did you just fancy the interest in it, or how did that come about?
Yeah, that's a funny story. My 13-year-old daughter, Zoe, and by the way, she's a fan of yours, Azure Greg. She appreciates you for subscribing to her channel. She remembers that. Yeah.
Nice.
But my daughter is really into all things AI. So she actually turned me on to, I don't know if it was ChatGPT or Character AI, but one of those SaaS products that you could interact with. And so that's how it originally came on my radar. And then shortly after she showed me, the world exploded in late 2022 when OpenAI formally came to the forefront. And so I've been playing with the various Azure AI components for a while, the cognitive services, the machine learning studio. But I saw immediately, wow, this OpenAI stuff, we're on the cusp of a huge paradigm shift that feels very similarly to how it felt with the World Wide Web in the mid-90s.
I would agree, 100%. Yeah, definitely interesting times ahead. Yeah, I'm going to change my job title to prompt engineer just for a laugh.
That's a funny joke. It's a meme in itself. Supposedly, prompt engineers earn all sorts of money, but I have yet to meet one.
I mean, same here. I don't think they exist. It's like
right. It's something to catch a recruiter's eye maybe on your LinkedIn, but I have yet to meet a real prompt engineer.
Same. Just before we go any further, I wanted to show you this message. Hi, Susheta.
Oh, wow. So thank you, Susheta.
Yeah, Susheta joins all of our sessions pretty much. So yeah, thanks for joining, Susheta, and that's very kind of you.
Yeah, it is. Thank you so much.
So OpenAI, let's chat about that. So that's Microsoft's version of kind of the OpenAI type thing. Well, not Microsoft, but they've got in partnership with OpenAI. What sort of things within OpenAI have you been looking at in particular?
Right. So first of all, for those who are newer to all this, OpenAI is a company that's got for-profit and non-for-profit branches, which leads to a whole bunch of complexities that I guess we could talk about at another time.
Yeah.
But they're in the news now because they've got some of the smartest machine learning models out there. The GPT model, Generative Pre-trained Transformer, that's the model that powers ChatGPT. You can consume the GPT API directly without all the conversational fluff on it. There's the DALL-E model, which is for text to image generation. Supposedly OpenAI is going to do text to audio or audio to text, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
And then there's also GPT. It used to be called Codex, but the GPT Turbo can also do source code generation. So this is what they're known for. Primarily, ChatGPT is in the news. And yeah, Greg, just to your point, Microsoft just got in there super fast. They've actually had a partnership with OpenAI for a couple years now, at least. It's not new, But now that it's blown up, it's pretty obvious, because Microsoft Azure is going to be the only way in the foreseeable future for an enterprise business to develop and fine-tune their own versions of this GPT model. You can work with OpenAI directly from openai.com, but they don't have the infrastructure or tools that Microsoft offers in Azure.
Yeah, I heard one or two people saying that it's actually faster using it from OpenAI than it is through Azure, but I haven't actually tested that out. It might be interesting. So what is the difference between OpenAI and kind of other cloud vendors' offerings of kind of this kind of stuff?
Well, we're going to hit the perimeter of my knowledge pretty fast if we start talking about Google Bard and what Amazon is doing.
Okay.
I'm not there yet, other than just anecdotally, I know that they were taken by surprise by these OpenAI models, so they're scrambling to catch up.
Yeah, I think Satya Nadella kind of laid down the gauntlet, didn't he? He was kind of a bit like, here's our offerings, let's see yours. So yeah, interesting times. So you've obviously used Azure OpenAI. Is it still in preview? Is it production ready? What sort of state is it in at the moment?
It's not in preview in terms of in the portal. It doesn't have the preview flag, so I can only reasonably assume it's generally available. But you'll find if you go to the Azure OpenAI Service docs, you have to request access to it. I mean, Microsoft evidently got flooded with so much demand. You've got to fill out a Microsoft form with your subscription ID. I don't know how long it'll take in the backlog, but hopefully you'll receive an email saying you're good. And at that point, you can deploy your own Azure OpenAI service instances, into which you then can deploy N number of models, DALL-E, GPT-3.5. And there's also capability to use the latest version of GPT, which is version 4, but that again is another Microsoft form. And I'm still actually on the wait list for that. I'd like to be approved someday. If there's anybody from Microsoft that's on the stream.
I think I might be able to get this. What am I trying to say? I think I know someone who can do you a wee favour, so we'll chat after this.
Okay, thank you. Good.
Yeah, I mean, I've got access to OpenAI. I haven't really looked at it yet. It's been on my to-do list, but the questions I have, we'll get into later on around security and what sort of data you should be using it with, because there's all sorts of questions around that stuff. I've written down some questions, so we'll go through them if that's all right. So I've already asked you about the competitors. I've already asked you. So how does Azure OpenAI service, does that integrate with other Azure services?
Yes, it does. And that, I think, is the chief value proposition of using Azure OpenAI Service as opposed to the other option, which is to consume the APIs from OpenAI directly. And it's enormous. I mean, if your business is already in Azure, then you already know. It definitely, it seems to me, would be a driver for other businesses to adopt Azure where maybe they wouldn't otherwise. Why? What do you get? Well, think about the Azure Resource Manager, just its tool set. Things like taxonomic tags and cost management, alerting, log analytics monitoring, the whole AI-backed Microsoft 365 Defender products. There's the private endpoint, role-based access control. So yeah, because the Azure OpenAI service is a native Azure Resource Manager service, you're able to benefit from that constellation of features.
Okay, so are there specific SDKs or APIs for the Azure OpenAI service at this time, or is that coming? Do you know?
Right, there's a software development kit or SDK for Python, and that's what I tell my students, that if you're a developer and you're looking to get into this, ultimately it's just REST API work. So I mean, you could work in Postman as far as that goes, but you're going to have the most comfortable experience as a developer using Python. I'm not sure beyond Python SDK what Microsoft has done. I can only expect that at the least they'll support .NET.
Yeah, I'm hoping so. Yeah.
But you know, and Python makes sense also when you think that Python's inventor, Guido van Rossum, works for Microsoft. You know, it's crazy how things happen.
Yep. Okay, so what are the kind of common use cases do you see for OpenAI just now? Now, obviously, the service is fairly new. There will be a lot of changes coming, I would imagine, different versions. But right now, what would you see as good use cases for OpenAI?
For businesses that are currently using, for instance, some of the cognitive services, there's some direct overlap because a business might have need for at-scale language translations, at-scale summarization, all those things that historically you could use cog, and you still can use cog services for. But now with GPT, it's much more intelligent, frankly. The model is just so much smarter. I know there's a real fear among many IT service desk personnel that ChatGPT may put them out of a job. And frankly, I think that there's already documentation of that reality.
Yeah.
So that notion of relying on a ChatGPT app that's been trained on your internal line of business data could very well supplant some need for human support personnel. For marketing and sales departments that are constantly paying for stock art assets, that's what DALL-E is all about, describing what you want in your stock image, and it gives you original art. Again, that's a gray area. I know that there are artists who are angry, for instance, that OpenAI has scraped all of their public domain art to train their model over the last X number of years, and they're wondering, what's up? What's going on here?
Yeah.
There's a lot of controversy and gray area because we're in early days with this generative AI stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, even with Microsoft Designer, which is free, you can sign up for that, put some text in and get it to generate some images. Yeah, that's interesting stuff. Let me just comment from Scott. Scott says, 2 legends of the community tonight. Tim, you're the main reason why he's using Azure.
Oh, wow.
So that's pretty cool.
Boy, this is, I don't know. You may make me cry. Thank you for this. This stuff, yeah, I mean, this beautiful stuff. This is what I love about, if I could just rant for a second. What I love about tech education is that it's so immediately practical. One of my favorite memories is I was presenting Wireshark at a conference once, and I'm just walking through the audience as I'm teaching, and there was a group VPN'd into CorpNet who were actively troubleshooting with stuff that they were learning at that moment with Wireshark. That immediate application is beautiful. And I also love this online format because I'm able to connect with people all around the globe. It's just a wonderful thing.
Yeah, no, brilliant. So thank you very much for coming on. What about pricing for Azure Open AI Service? Because I've seen some people say it's quite expensive, but how does it work pricing model wise?
Well, I'd recommend everybody hit up Google and search. My favorite recipe is Azure space service name. In this case, Azure Open AI Service space pricing. Google will give you the pricing page straight away. The pricing model is going to depend upon which of those model variants you use. There's GPT 3.5 and GPT 4. 4 is a lot smarter and bigger, but it's also slower and a lot more expensive than 3.5. 3.5 has different sub-variants, again, that have different costs. If you've got a smaller, less invasive problem to solve, you can save money choosing a small variant of GPT 3.5. But ultimately, what you're paying for is what are called your tokens. When you submit your prompt to the AI, it's going to be, verbose or concise, whatever your prompt is. It gets converted, your letters and words, into these tokens. It's like 4 letters per token, approximately. And you're charged both for your prompt and for the completion, which is the formal name for the response that the AI gives you. And Microsoft understands, look here, we're charging you for your own words, but we're going to give you a discount there because what you really want is the original data coming back from the AI. So all that's broken out on the Azure Open AI Service pricing page. Tokens. It's something as a developer you definitely want to think about in your applications. You want to think about, how can I make the user prompt? How can I sanitize it? How can I make it as concise as possible, but also as effective as possible? So I think there's a real truth to this prompt engineering stuff. It's more than just a cliche.
Yeah. So if you're not knowing too much about this service, if you're doing that on your own data, does it cost the same, or is it less, or how does it work if you're kind of prompt engineering on your own data?
From what I remember on the pricing page, there's no distinction. But to your point, Greg, that I think is just as important a value proposition for Azure Open AI Service as the fact that it's in Azure. the fact that you can fine tune those models against your own proprietary data. In other words, making your own ChatGPT, not just smart on public data, but also on your own data. At the end of the day, though, you're doing REST requests, and then your prompt and the completion get turned into tokens. So I think it's immaterial whether it's a fine-tuned custom model or if it's an off-the-shelf instance.
Okay, so Ameya's got this question, which pretty much I think you've just answered. So, is there any differences in OpenAI service on Azure and OpenAI directly?
Functionally, only not in terms of using or addressing the APIs, because they're very similar, to the point where if you had an application using openai.com, it should be pretty trivial to port that over to Azure. It's just REST requests.
Yeah.
The surrounding infrastructure on the openai.com side, it's just not built for enterprise. You can have a basic team structure, but there's nowhere near the thing in terms of groups and users and role-based access control. There's not any capacity to regenerate or rotate API keys like there is in Azure. In Azure, you can store your keys in Azure Key Vault. You can script out them to be regenerated every so often. So it seems pretty clear and obvious to me that maybe for a small startup or a smaller business, you could get started consuming from OpenAI. But really, if you want to do real business, it's all the roads really do go to Azure Open AI Service. Microsoft has a lock on those OpenAI models.
Okay, so here's another question further to that, I think. How could you differentiate between Azure OpenAI and Copilot? Is Copilot built by leveraging Azure OpenAI?
Great question. No, not exactly. GitHub Copilot is a project owned by GitHub, which of course in turn is Microsoft. The model used in GitHub Copilot is GPT-3.5 Turbo, what originally was called Codex, but OpenAI deprecated that, and now the GPT-3.5 Turbo model, it's sort of a do everything model because it can do both the source code generation and the text generation. So that's what's going on in GitHub Copilot. Now the GitHub Copilot X stuff, that's all in like a waiting list. There's the chat module that's out in the wild, and I use that quite a bit. When you're using GitHub Copilot X, then you are using GPT-4, but still the word codex no longer exists anymore. GPT-4 is meant to be equally smart at both text generation and source code generation.
Yeah, before we move on, you mentioned you've been using GitHub Copilot X. Now, I was upgrading a .NET 3.1 function the other day there, and it was supposed to upgrade it to .NET 6. Now, I've not even touched .NET since 3.1, and I was sitting in the Visual Studio Code using GitHub Copilot X saying, please fix this, and it literally fixed it for me, which was unbelievable. Like, I literally fixed the errors in my code. Why is it not compiling? So I was having a chat with Copilot, and it was basically fixing it for me. It was absolutely unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, there's do I want to call it a problem or a challenge? I guess it's who you're talking to. But the so-called September 2021 problem with GPT, the fact that its knowledge cuts off in September 2021, and that's because OpenAI was scouring the public internet and they scraped all of github.com up to that point. So the notion is you're going to have limited results, sometimes no results, when you're asking GPT questions past. There are a couple workarounds to that. And to what Greg's just talking about, if you sign up for GitHub Copilot and then GitHub Copilot X, their chat module, once you've got that chat GPT embedded in your VS Code or Visual Studio, there you're using GPT-4. And I've also found that it's smart up to date. You know, to your point, Greg, you can ask about libraries and stuff that are way past 2021. So that's a nice pro tip to know
I was surprised because I was like, as I was doing it, I was thinking, this is 2021 cut off. Is it going to know about .NET 6? And it did. And I was like, wow. So I was upgrading like a durable function and it knew exactly what to do. And I was like, how does that work? So that's thanks for answering my question at least. So I've got lots of questions here. If anyone's got questions, just keep chucking them out. But are there any cost-saving strategies? I'm thinking like large enterprises. Is there any kind of cost-saving strategies or best practices when using OpenAI service? Is there any hacks to make it cheaper or anything like that? Not that you know of, or any ideas?
Yeah, absolutely. Keeping in mind that your prompt completion pairs are summed, they're converted into tokens and summed. And by the way, you can see if you go to platform.openai.com/tokenizer, there's an online tokenizer where you can put in sample text and just get a better feel for token count. But as I mentioned earlier, you want to think about the prompt that ultimately is going to be submitted to GPT.
Yep.
You may want to sanitize, make it more concise. That's why both OpenAI and Microsoft Azure OpenAI Service have these web playgrounds where you can test different prompts. And you also have control via parameters on how the model behaves that can have a direct impact on cost. For example, there's the temperature control.
Temperature, I was on the tip of my tongue. Yeah.
Where lower temperature is a more deterministic to the point response, and a higher temperature value is a more creative, potentially more verbose response. There's another parameter that controls the maximum token length. Now, each model has an architectural maximum token length, but you can actually shorten that even more in your parameters to make sure that you're getting back less. Maybe you don't need 3 pages worth, you only need a half a page worth.
So when I think of things that I would like to do with this, I'm thinking like internal GitHub repository at Intercept where I work. If we had a wiki for every project, I could use OpenAI and ChatGPT to basically look at this and ask questions about projects. See, that's the kind of thing that would make it interesting to me, I think. Documentation searching.
Yes, I want to draw everybody's attention to the site githubnext.com. Wait, is it GitHub Copilot Next? I think it's just GitHub Next, but let me quickly see. GitHub Copilot Next.com. No, maybe it's GitHub Next, but that's a homepage that shows you a list of all of the GitHub Copilot Next Gen features. And to your point, Greg, one of those modules deals with documentation. And so it's meant to be a short circuit way instead of having to do the traditional Stack Overflow trawling. It may even apply to your own projects and repos. I don't know. I'm on the waiting list of all of those. The only one that I have approval for is the chat. But some of those, if you're working with Git and GitHub, are amazing. That one GitHub Copilot for PRs, that Notion, it'll create a PR description for you and tell you, you summarize the changes,
because that's amazing, because a lot of people just put in like fixed a bug, press return, somebody approves it, and you're like, what was that 2 years ago?
It's tedious. Or if you're asked to do a code review, it'll actually suggest based on the code that it's looking at. It can save you huge time and effort,
I didn't
know about
Copilot for Docs.
happening.
Yeah, it's Copilot for Docs, it's called.
Yeah, right. Copilot for Docs. There's Copilot for PRs. I'm really excited about GitHub Copilot for CLI. Because, what was that arcane Git command? I need to see branches from such and so 6 months ago. And you just, there it is. It'll do that kind of recommendations for Git CLI, for GitHub CLI, or Bash. So this is some really useful innovation happening. So I would definitely have everybody take a look at GitHub Copilot because it's on fire. It really is.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you can even visualize code bases. There's a lot more to it than I realized. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because I knew about it, but I've used GitHub Copilot X just for the chat thing. Cool. Okay, so that's kind of like the cost saving. But what about how does OpenAI scale? So if more people start to use like my internal instance of OpenAI, pointing at my internal GitHub repos, and thousands of people start using it, how does it scale? Do we know how that works?
No, I don't know how that works from an architectural standpoint. My best guess is that we have virtual machine scale sets in Azure, just massively parallel compute. And on the OpenAI.com side, it's probably the same thing, given the fact that Microsoft and OpenAI are best friends forever, you know?
Yeah.
But I don't have any quantitative data offhand that I could cite. I'd like to know that myself. I'd like to hear from businesses that have been really hammering these services, what they've found in terms of predictable results, even at scale. I mean, I know they're struggling because I've experienced some capacity errors using Azure Open AI Service where it wouldn't honor a request because of
Really?
So I have a feeling that although there's a lot of dynamic scale going on under the hood, even Microsoft with all of their compute is struggling a bit with it. So
yeah, what was I going to say? When you're in Europe and you deploy the OpenAI service, if you still go and use some of the services, it says you need to have an account in the US, which is a little bit frustrating because when you create an OpenAI service, you have to pick a region, and if you pick Europe, that's fine. But then obviously when you sign up to the waitlist, you only get one subscription ID, or you have to give them a subscription ID. So I did that, installed OpenAI in Europe, excuse me. And then when I went to use one of the services, it's like, you need it in the US. And I was a bit like, I think it's the bring your own data thing. It was like, it must be in the US. And I was like, well, that's a bit disappointing. But yeah, I'm supposed to fix that eventually.
Yes, I think it's an early days thing more than anything else. To your point, though, that's another, as I see it, an enormous advantage of Azure Open AI Service. The fact that when you're fine-tuning your models with your own internal data, especially if you're going to store it, say, in Azure storage, like in Blob Storage or Data Lake, you've got the customer managed key covered as well, instead of just relying on the vendor's key. There's nothing like that at OpenAI.com. So that just again speaks to OpenAI is not built really for the enterprise. You can do some you either can start to do some fine tuning at OpenAI.com, or I know it's on their near-term roadmap, but either way, how are you getting to your data and what's that look like? Whereas in Azure with Private Link, you not only can communicate with your Azure OpenAI models privately off internet, but your source data as well.
Yeah, which is perfectly exactly what you want. You know, you want to be using Private Link and private endpoints. You don't want to be doing over the internet. Okay, cool. Next question I've got is kind of starting to talk about security and compliance, because this is the one where everybody's like, oh, where's this going to? So, where does it store the data? For, like, if you use your own data and you want to do that, where is it? How is that working? How does it know, or what data is getting shared with OpenAI and Microsoft when you bring in your own data?
For a canonical answer to that, I would draw people's attentions to the docs pages. Actually, you might just go to the OpenAI marketing page at azure.com, because there'll be an FAQ there. That's everybody's question. Are you going to use my private data to train public models? OpenAI says no. If you're consuming their APIs directly, they say that they won't take your data and use it to train up the models. Same thing. That's the value with Microsoft, that you own your data. So they're not going to vacuum it up. But I do want to say, I'm glad that this is coming up, because I will always evangelize this. If you're going to use the ChatGPT app, the public app that's in the news, chat.openai.com, never, ever put in sensitive data there. Because the reason that app exists is a way for OpenAI to gather more data to refine its models. Anything you put in there, you can assume is being vacuumed up and used to train the model.
Yeah, when I worked at JP Morgan, American Bank, there used to be these websites where you could paste in JSON and it would prettify everyone, and they had to block all of those kind of websites because developers were just grabbing like sensitive data and pasting it in to prettify it, and I was like, no. So that's a good example of that. You shouldn't really be. Yeah, I don't think people realize that they're doing that. They're probably asking questions and pasting stuff in and just going like, especially with the code. So that makes me think about, if I'm using GitHub Copilot X and I'm getting it on customers' code, how does that work? Is that scanning that code as well? Or?
Right. According to the docs, the GitHub docs, they say no. Now, here's the gray area. for the past N number of years, we didn't have a choice because we didn't know that all of our public GitHub repos were being ingested into their models. Now, if you go into your, if you sign into github.com and go to your user settings, you can now untick a box to opt out of data collection. Now, understand that that's going to be all of your public repos. According to OpenAI, they've never scanned anybody's private repos. It's only public open source repositories. And again, according to the GitHub docs, when you're using Copilot chat and you're putting what, potentially there could be some sensitive stuff in there, they say that that's yours. They don't include that in their
That's interesting because it can fix your code, so it must be reading the code.
That's true. At the least, it's reading it, and it's in context too. You'll note that you have to have the editor tabs open. Eventually, I believe Copilot will be able to look at your workspace and be able to look through your project directories. But now, as long as you have your code files open in VS Code, it can use that whole context when it's giving you recommendations. That can be super convenient.
Yeah, I'd imagine there'll be some companies that you won't be allowed to use any of this stuff.
For sure. I know of many companies that have organizationally disabled the ChatGPT public app, chatopenai.com. And same with Copilot, actually. I would, if I were a business leader, I would want to make sure to have as much assurance, legally enforceable assurance as possible that my data that's being used with GitHub Copilot goes no further.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure I read somewhere, you know how when you go into Copilot, you can get it to generate code as well. You can say like comment / write a function like the Fibonacci sequence. Was there not a guy who basically did that and his private repo code came up? I'm sure that happened at the very beginning. I'm sure there was a guy trying to sue Microsoft for that.
That's uncomfortable. I was going to make a joke. I was going to make a joke, Greg, that it gave me a recommendation that had your name in a line comment, but you just I mean, that's uncomfortable. But just like the artists with the DALL-E model, the image generation model, a lot of artists are upset because they didn't have a say.
I didn't realize
all of their art that's in the public domain, the artists want it in the public domain so people see it. Meanwhile, it gets vacuumed into DALL-E, and now original art is coming up, and the artist is like, that looks a little bit like something.
So how is that allowed? Though? How were they allowed to scan? I mean, obviously, I take it OpenAI had to talk to GitHub and say, is it okay if we scan this repository or these repos? But how did they scan the app? How's that legal? That doesn't sound like a good idea.
I mean, my short answer is I don't know. I know I saw in the news in the last week that OpenAI now is allowing us to add an entry in our robots text file to block GPT bot. So they've got a named entity for their crawler. So, but these are coming after the fact. It's almost, it reminds me of that. Have you ever heard that expression? It's better to ask for forgiveness than to ask for permission. It feels like that's what OpenAI has done.
Yeah. And I'm amazed they've got away with that. I'm sure somebody will be suing them, no doubt. Okay, what was my next question? Is there any kind of compatibility issues or limitations of this stuff? In terms of like integrating with tools, or does it just work with every Azure service, or is there any kind of limitations? Not sure.
From an app dev standpoint, no. You address it, as I mentioned, just with HTTP requests. There'd be potentially some Azure specific stuff going on, for instance, if you did a private link, but
I'm sure there will be some.
That's all that comes to mind.
Okay, no worries. How do you go about training models using the OpenAI service? Have you done any of that?
I want to, but I can't. Thanks for bringing that up, because that's something else that's disabled for customers. If you go into the docs, into the Azure OpenAI Service docs and look into fine tuning, that's the technical term for when you're building the models on your own data. They say that they've turned it off temporarily due to capacity.
Oh, really?
And that if you already had started doing fine tuning projects, you can continue to, but they're not allowing anybody. So you'll find in the portal, the controls are grayed out.
Oh,
I
wow.
think, Mike, from what I've seen, Microsoft is doing a pretty nice job of abstracting complexity. Because, look, as far as I'm concerned, when you're looking at machine learning, that whole aspect of data engineering, that's some
Mhm.
real PhD
Yeah,
level stuff.
yeah, that's
And the service, and there's a web studio called Azure Open AI Studio. They built
mhm.
a front end for it. And in there, it's a wizard driven interface. Now,
Yep,
there is most of the work seems to be in preparing your data. Surprise,
yes,
surprise. It's expecting JSON line data, and it needs to be formatted as prompt completion pairs and so on. So that I can imagine would take a bulk of time to do. But then you're just essentially uploading it wherever it's
mhm.
coming from, maybe Azure storage. You're ingesting it into your custom model and then letting it take off running. That's my understanding of the fine tuning process. Most of the work is going to be massaging the source data to get it into the
Yeah, okay.
correct format.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
And how long do these models take to build? Do they take a while to do? Is it like days or hours or
No,
depends
it's
on
kind of frightening actually, Greg, because I've deployed a few models so far and it was almost instantaneously.
oh,
Some
really?
Azure services can take, or if you try to do a virtual network gateway, you'll be sitting there almost an hour.
Yeah, well, let's not talk about that. I'm scared with that.
But the models, really, I was taken aback. It's almost like click deploy or submit your PowerShell and bang, it's done.
I
It's
was just gonna ask you
frighteningly
what I was
fast.
gonna ask you about the deployment models, but you've just basically said that, right? Okay, cool, cool, cool. Yeah, I need to spend some time looking at. Well, obviously, I need to wait till it's more available, but yeah, I'm looking to train it on just test data and see what it's
Mhm.
like. Um,
It's still such early days. I'm
yeah.
actually having a little bit of struggle. My blog, I might as well plug my new
Oh,
blog.
I've got your blog here.
It's
Hang on.
it's
Yeah,
Azure Open AI
there we go.
Service.blog. Hang on.
I've got it
Azure
there on the screen. Azure
Azure
OpenAI.
OpenAI.blog, right. The reason why it's taken me long to do my second post, it's going to be on deploying the service and the
Right.
models programmatically, is I
Cool.
was having a hard time finding bicep resource definitions for the models. It's
Ah,
pretty straightforward to do a bicep deployment of the service, but it's harder to dig in. The way it's architected, it's not really as a nest. It's kind of a snarl,
okay.
unfortunately.
Right.
Um, but yeah, since it's in Azure, you should be able to use infrastructure as code
Mhm.
principles to manage these assets like any other resource in Azure.
Okay, cool. And have you any idea how often, like, the service itself gets updated? Does it ever tell you things like that, or is it just done in the background?
No, it shows when you can choose what model you want.
Mhm.
It defaults to use the most recent version. So
Ah,
as let's say you start with GPT 3.5, there's going to be a month and year specific subversion, and it'll default to auto update, which is kind of cool. And maybe that would
mhm.
be another value proposition that Azure OpenAI brings to the table. But they also let you choose a particular version if for application reasons you needed to pin to a particular model version.
Yeah, I made a good point earlier on about I think reading is different from using it. In other words, reading these yeah, that's a good point actually. Okay. Oh, sorry, didn't realize you were reading it. Okay. So is there anywhere we can go and learn? Is there any kind of communities or forums for this kind of thing where people can go and ask questions? Is like a for an OpenAI service? Is it that new that not a lot of people are just trying it out at the moment? Do you think, or do you think there's lots of resources to learn about this service?
I've been leaning, it's not interactive, but I've been leaning into the Microsoft Learn docs. If you
Mhm.
go to the conceptual docs, those are these are the facts.
Yeah,
And then MS Learn training, they have some basic, it's a little bit skeletal early days, but
yeah,
there's some basic training on Azure OpenAI Service. I should know if if the engineering team has a blog. In fact, I will check after we get
yeah.
off the screen. Check
Okay.
if
Mhm.
the team has a blog, because that's always a good place to maybe
Yeah.
springboard into making an introduction. And they also, I don't know, but I know that the GitHub Next development team maintains a pretty active Discord channel where they
Oh, okay.
interact with customers. So that would be something to be on the lookout for, either a Microsoft sponsored or community sponsored Discord for Azure Open AI. I will be looking at that after the session as well.
Yeah, I've saw this week. There's a few people. I'll just close the window. There's a few people had some blog posts about running ChatGPT using your own Azure Open AI service. Have you looked at that at all?
Well, sure. Yeah, it's important to know that ChatGPT is simply a descendant of the GPT model. It's the GPT model that does text and source code generation, but it has extra wrapping around it for conversation. If
Okay.
you're just going to address GPT, it'll just give you a response.
Right.
If you're addressing ChatGPT, it'll be, yeah, no problem. How you doing? Let's go out for espresso. And here, by the way, here's the answer that you want. You see what I mean? And because of that, you can do both, really. Long story
Right.
short, you can deploy just straight up GPT to do completions. You also can do the Chat GPT variant if you do want that conversational fluff.
I'm just thinking out loud, as I like to do. So I pay for ChatGPT right now, which is $20 a month, I think it is. I could probably install that into my Azure OpenAI service, and the whole company could use that. Would that be the same result as using ChatGPT from going to chatgpt.com, or is it different results?
That's a good point. I believe it's with Chat. It depends. I'm thinking of different things in my head. I mean, you can control the temperature when you're addressing the Chat GPT APIs directly. And if you set the temperature identically on Azure and OpenAI.com and did the same exact prompt, I'd bet you 50 euros to a stale jelly donut that you're going to get separate responses back. Every time it gives you, if you lower the temperature to make it really strict, maybe they'll be more similar. But it's the whole benefit, supposedly, of generative AI is that you're getting generated original data as a response. So it shouldn't be just parroting the same exact word strings, you see?
Yeah, that makes sense. I wonder if I might even try that. I might deploy it because there's got a deploy now button. So I was thinking I might try that later on and just see how it goes. So I'll probably do a bit of learning as we go down.
That's a fun experiment. I like that.
What sort of things are you looking to do with OpenAI going forward? Is there any kind of wee side quest projects you've got lined up or anything like that?
Yeah, I use it personally for learning and investigation. In many ways, ChatGPT in particular behaves as a surrogate Google in some ways.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest, when I'm on a call with customers, I have ChatGPT open and I can sit there and type without even looking and basically just I can go, because some people will ask things like, what's the SLA for blah, and I don't know these things off the top of my head, and a lot of people don't, but you can chat GPT it and it'll tell you. So yeah, I must admit I have it open all day, every day.
I find that to be more and more common when I'm out here, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee in the US, and when I'm out and about talking to people and we just happen to get on that subject sometimes, they'll almost sheepishly say, oh, I'm embarrassed to admit this, but my work thinks I'm a hero, but really I'm relying on ChatGPT.
Well, in that line of work, there's so many different subjects you can get asked about. You're never going to remember it all. Like, there's no way I remember SLAs for, storage account SLAs like that.
Totally.
I'm not going to even try and remember stuff like that.
Yeah, that's trivia. But to that point, though, another thing I always want to make sure to evangelize is the hallucination issue. That at times GPT will give information that's factually incorrect. Now, sometimes it's correct but outdated because of that 2021 problem. It'll reference, especially in Microsoft ecosystem with everything getting renamed. I don't think ChatGPT knows about Entra ID yet, for example. But that question of hallucination, at times I've had results come back that were literally fictitious. So there is that caveat to trust but verify, and to not just assume it's 100% correct.
Yeah, I find that hard to understand. So at the MVP summit, we were in a chat about this, and the guy was like, watch this. And he asked a question, I think it was like, who is the author of the very first SQL Server book? and it wrote absolute nonsense. It gave off a name and a book title of people who didn't exist. It even gave you a Wikipedia page that wasn't even a valid page. And I was like to him, so why does it do that? And it's like, well, it needs to give some sort of answer. So people need to be aware that the answer isn't always correct and can be completely made up, which I think a lot of people don't really realize.
Yeah, that's the part that really bothers me, especially being a teacher. The notion of the model giving you misinformation. And the ethical, I mean, supposedly, I say supposedly, OpenAI and Microsoft both adhere to responsible AI principles.
Yep.
It seems to me the most ethical and responsible response is I don't know, rather than give you a truly bogus response.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that because it sometimes says, like, after 2021, I don't know that, and that's fine. It should really say the same instead of giving you. But I guess how does it work out how does it know it's right? That's the question I would suggest. How does it? That's like that book didn't exist. The author didn't exist, and the Wikipedia page didn't exist, and it's not going to go and check that.
This speaks to prompt engineering and how important, how crucial crafting your prompt is. And one thing that we've got in that public chat.openai.com that we don't yet have in Azure OpenAI Service is the custom instructions that are brand new. They've been in the news. I mean, you can do that same thing in Azure OpenAI Service. It's basically just you're prefacing your user prompt. Your user prompt is what you're asking the AI to do. And the system prompt is where you're role playing and you're telling the AI what it is and what it should be. In the public ChatGPT app, it's called custom instructions, but it's the same thing. So you can say, you're an expert, you give only verified information. And what I like to do in my prompt is I say, I already know all of the responsible AI principles, so you don't have to remind me, and the AI will behave according to your instructions. So that might be a way to help mitigate against this hallucination stuff.
Yeah, okay. So we've got a couple of comments from Ahmed. Hello to everyone, by the way. I've not said hello to James, and I've not said hello to Samson and Ahmed. Hi. So I made a point there, and I think Bing does that. It says it doesn't know push on requests, which is good. So Bing basically says I don't know.
Yeah, the Bing.com is kind of a different beast.
Yeah.
I think the reason why it's so strict is because it's front and center. I mean, it's in everybody's face worldwide. You've got kids using it. You've got people from all different backgrounds. So it is a lot more judicious. And I kind of like how when Bing Chat gives you a result, they're actually annotated or footnoted. It'll actually link to the sources that it used to give you back each statement. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool. Amaya made a good point as well. I mean, she's got a good question. Talking of versions of the models, do the models released in Azure at the same time as their OpenAI? So if OpenAI brings out a new model, does Azure get the same? Or is there a delay? Or are they completely different?
They're definitely not completely different. It would be more a question of how in step they are.
Right.
I don't know if they're day and date. I suspect not, having worked at Microsoft full time. And what I've learned being on the inside there more than anything else is that developers and engineering teams are human beings like everybody else.
Yeah, everybody thinks
sometimes,
it's a little bit harsh.
And especially when you're in different organizations like OpenAI and then the Azure engineering team, how often they communicate is a total variable. So my educated guess would be that there's an arrangement, of course, if a new version shows up at OpenAI, that it's going to be surfaced in Azure. It's just unclear when that synchronization will take place.
Yeah. Okay. And then Samson had a question. I think we might have covered this, but is GPT-4 available on Azure OpenAI?
Yes, it is. GPT-4 is available in OpenAI. However, you have to apply. So go into the docs and you'll see a banner in the What is Azure OpenAI Service that says that there'll be a link to the form actually where you can get on the wait list for GPT-4. I am still semi-happily waiting on the wait list for that.
Let's have a chat about that after this thing, and I'll see if I can help you with that. Yeah. when I was at the MVP Summit, someone asked Mark Rusnovich, like, for what does he see in the next 10 years? And someone also asked things like, well, his reaction to that was, I don't know, because AI has completely changed what he thought would be the next 10 years in kind of compute world and Azure world. So someone also asked him a really good question about how easy is it to use AI for bad purposes? So things like, I always think of like, I can use it to help me write code, but I could also use that to write nasty code, and I could write back doors and stuff like that. What's your thoughts on people using AI for bad purposes? How how does it? Is there any kind of governance over that kind of stuff?
Yeah, there is. Microsoft has their own 6-pillar responsible AI framework that you actually need to attest that you'll ascribe to when you use their service. OpenAI also has a variant, same idea though, of responsible AI. There was a window of several months earlier this year where people were hammering on ChatGPT using specially crafted were called jailbreak prompts. That mean you're not jailbreaking anything. Like there's one, the most popular was called the Do Anything Now or Dan prompt. And basically it's a great big prompt that explicitly instructs the AI to ignore all of its responsible AI guardrails. So that way you then could ask how to do some nefarious thing and the AI will happily give you those instructions. However, more recently, over the last couple months, both Microsoft and OpenAI have really put a lid on that, to the point where if you start with those kind of prompts, I know for a fact OpenAI is likely to warn you and then block your account, you see. So they're starting to put some real enforcement down against those things. And I've tested, I don't use those prompts ever anyway, but I've tested at bing.com just asking about the Dan prompt. And it's weird. Sometimes it'll actually answer me in a generic way, but usually it'll say, it's time to talk about something else. And it'll just chop that conversation and you can't go any further with it.
So I guess my next question is, well, obviously this is probably coming, do you think AI in general will replace people's jobs long term?
It appears to already be the case. And it's
Where have you
easy
seen
for,
that?
well, I don't know anybody who's lost their job due to this directly yet. I've seen it. I always am looking at the tech news every day, and I've seen reports in there. It stands to reason, though, from a paradigm perspective, from a really big picture perspective, because I think back in my life to the 80s when robotics, especially in manufacturing, became a big deal, and people were worried that they would lose their job on assembly lines because robots could do their job. And the truth of the matter is many people did, in fact, lose their jobs. I believe the same thing is at play here. It's easy for me to say because I'd like to think that I'm not replaceable by an AI, but really, if I get honest with myself, I'm as expendable in my job as anybody is in theirs. So what I evangelize to students and to anybody else who listen is get smart with these technologies now. Number one, you can directly benefit from the efficiency. And number two, there's always the real argument that garbage in, garbage out, that it needs to be I hope, a human leveraging the AI rather than the AI leveraging a human. I hope we don't get to that point.
Me too. Yeah. What's been your favorite use of OpenAI service so far for you personally?
Oh, personally, I love the fact, like with my daughter, for instance, she's 13 and she's a real creative art kid. And she'll think about, like the other day, she's like, I want to do a craft themed with Rain World, which is a game she's obsessed with. And I'm like, let's just ask ChatGPT. And I'm like, generate some craft ideas that are themed on Rain World. And the next thing you know, we have more work than we could stand, So really big convenience in terms of that. Professionally, it's helping me out every day, honestly, in my course development. Just as a quick example, I do not like writing ad or marketing copy. And it's one of the things I have to do when I make courses for my employer, Pluralsight. And so it's great to just feed ChatGPT some bullet points and say, generate some snazzy marketing copy for me.
have you seen any of the AI stuff within Windows 11? Have you seen any of that?
No,
No.
how is it working?
So
What is it doing?
at MVP Summit, they showed us a little demo of that,
Mhm.
and it was a bit like Cortana. It was a thing kind of in the bottom right hand corner, and basically they had a PDF document, and instead of reading the PDF document, you basically said summarize this PDF, and you drag it on, and it would give you 10 bullet points of the PDF. And I was like, that's pretty cool.
Yes. Wow,
The
that
other
is
thing was
super
like,
powerful.
yeah, it was like the guy typed in like, show me the top 10 songs I've listened to last year on Spotify. Boom, there's your list. Start playing them one by one. And that kind of stuff is really cool.
It really is. You know, Microsoft, it makes sense that they're injecting GPT into all their products. And one that I was starting to use a lot before I left Microsoft earlier this year was in Power BI, where you can, it'll, at least
Yeah.
the web portal version of Power
Mhm.
BI, it'll generate insights for you based on what it sees in your report.
Yeah, they did a demo at MVP Summit where they had a CSV of car makes and models, and they dragged it into Power BI desktop, and they were like, basically the guy was like, I think it was Power BI initially. No, sorry, it was Power Apps initially, and it was like,
Mhm.
from this CSV data, tablize it, and then put it into tables, and then it was create me a front end, and it basically created a web page front end where you could go and edit all of the data and then add stuff in it. I was like, this is going to change the way people work.
Yes, totally.
Big time.
I mean,
yeah.
the Azure bot framework's been around for a while and Power Virtual Agents, but honestly, those are kind of janky solutions to create a really smart, intelligent chatbot. And now we've got ChatGPT. I'm excited to see specifically how the Power Virtual Agent and Azure Bot Service engineers are going to incorporate GPT into those
I'll tell you a
services.
funny story about when I was at JP Morgan, they basically came out with a chatbot where you could chat and get your password reset. So if you forgot your password on a Monday morning, but somebody from the security team in Singapore put a bit of software on it to check what people were typing in and basically managed to hack everybody's username and password. So you have to be careful with chatbots. I thought that was awesome. So someone actually got Jamie Diamond's username and password for logging in, the top guy at JP Morgan.
Wow.
Because they put a keylogger on this chatbot, which was something that my team were working on. So we had to quickly get rid of that. That was quite interesting.
Ooh,
yeah. So
ouch.
what have you been doing with DALL-E? Has your daughter been using DALL-E to generate images and stuff like that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm always on the search for stock art. And
yeah.
what I like about DALL-E, not only do I not have to worry about paying, which I'm happy to do, paying for royalty and use, the art coming out of DALL-E, at least it's supposed to be original.
Yeah.
So there's no even Creative Commons on it because it's original art.
Nah,
And
that's awesome.
you know, it's pretty useful. I find it mostly helpful for stock art use and general illustrative purposes, but it's an interesting service. And if I haven't mentioned this, that is also available as a model in Azure Open AI Service. So you can do that DALL-E image generation there.
And are these so these are basically just specialized GPT engineering for image generation. That's what DALL-E is, isn't it? Yeah.
That's exactly what it is. You've got the parent GPT model, and then you've got the different variants, the Chat GPT variant, the DALL-E variant, and that's really it. It's there's the GPT text that does source code, then there's Chat GPT, then there's DALL-E, and there'll be more to come. I've been seeing rumblings in the news concerning audio. I'm interested to see how that's going to work.
That'd be interesting. Okay, so before you go, let's do, so this is your blog. So if anyone wants to read Tim's up and coming Azure Open AI blog, looking forward to post number 2.
Thank you. Yes, thanks for the inspiration. I better log into WordPress and get going with that sooner rather than later.
If anyone wants to reach out to Tim, that's his Twitter. He's also got his own blog. So what's the difference between that and that's just a normal blog?
Well, techtrainertim.com is not actually a blog. It's just essentially a portfolio site is basically what it is.
Okay. And if anyone wants to reach out to you on LinkedIn, it's Timothy Warner.
Tim,
thanks very much for coming on.
You're welcome.
I'm probably going to go and download install the ChatGPT on Azure Open AI Service just to see what that's like. So
Nice.
we might have you back on in a couple of months and do some demos if you want. If you've got some demos, we could do that.
Yes, I'll absolutely have demos.
Yeah, I need to play with that a bit more, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Right. Thank you very much for coming on. I'm really interested to go and I'm going to go and look at that as well. GitHubNext.com looks very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay. But just before you go, have you got any conferences or talks lined up? I know you've got some other talks lined up. What sort of stuff have you got coming up?
Last weekend, I was at in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I was at the PowerShell on the River conference. One of the sessions was actually on Azure Open AI. Coming up next, I'm going to be doing quite a bit of user group presentations, like the Minnesota Azure Users Group. I don't have a date on that offhand, but I know I'm slated to work with them in the next month or so. I would say just go to meetup.com, check out Azure User Groups. I think it's Minnesota is the next one.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah. Thanks again for coming on. Right.
Absolutely.
So on Wednesday coming, I'm joined by Luke Murray, and we're going to be chatting about all things Azure. So Luke's going to be joining us from New Zealand at 8:30, and that's tomorrow. So looking forward to that. Tim, let me just play the outro music, and then don't go. I'll speak to you once we've finished. So thanks everyone for joining. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Thanks everyone. Catch you later. Just do.